over, I would just like to take this opportunity to remind members, if they wish to contribute in a statement or an urgent question, they do need to be here for the opening statement. Which brings us to a statement on the fiscal rules. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I would like to make a statement to the House about the action the Chancellor will take this week to fix the foundations and rebuild Britain. Economic growth and modern public services can only be built on strong foundations. That is why this government has brought political and economic stability back to Britain. After years of chaos from the Conservative Party, chaos that cost families, businesses and public services dear, the British people are now rightly looking to this new Labour government to clear up the mess from the last government, to fix the foundations and to rebuild Britain. This is the change my party promised the country, and this is the change we will deliver. To deliver this, the fiscal rules that the Chancellor will set out this week will establish the basis for stable fiscal policy, meaning careful management of day-to-day spending and responsible long-term plans to invest and grow the economy. As we committed to in our manifesto, the government will have two robust fiscal rules which will guide the decisions we will take. The first is our stability rule, that we will pay for all day-to-day spending on public services from receipts. The current budget was last in surplus under the last Labour government, and this Labour government will return the public finances to that position once again. The second is our investment rule, which will get debt falling as a proportion of our economy. This will ensure that we can secure the investment our economy needs to grow and generate jobs and opportunities for people across the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, whilst also maintaining a strong fiscal anchor and ensuring that our debt burden is falling over time. The inherited plans we received from the last government would have seen public sector investment decline to the lowest level in over 10 years. A path of declining investment is the path of a declining nation, and we refuse to follow it. Instead, we will seize on the huge opportunities of the future to support the enterprise and talent that this country creates. This government recognises that sustained public investment is a crucial driver for long-term economic growth, giving the private sector the confidence to invest too. But our ambitions on public sector investment must be balanced against maintaining debt on sustainable trajectories and ensuring that we invest every pound of taxpayers' money responsibly. That's why I will deliver a 10-year national infrastructure strategy next spring, working with colleagues across government, the nations and regions, and with our mayors and the private sector, to set out a robust long-term strategy for sound investment. That's why our new approach to overlapping multi-year spending reviews will improve the way in which we allocate and spend capital. And that's why the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and I will lead the new National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, which will drive better delivery of major projects and infrastructure across the country. In addition to the work of the new Office of Value for Money and the National Audit Office, these robust guardrails will ensure that our capital spending is value for money and our financial investments deliver a positive return for the Exchequer. Finally, the Chancellor has been listening to the views of institutions like the IMF and expert economists. And as the Chancellor has set out, that is why the Treasury has been reviewing the right measure of debt to target in the fiscal rules ahead of this upcoming budget. The details of this policy will be announced to the House in the Chancellor's statement on Wednesday, alongside an economic and fiscal forecast produced by the independent OBR, and in the usual way, the fiscal rules will be published in a draft Charter for Budget Responsibility, on which members will vote in due course. I commend the statement to the House.
Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Gareth Davies.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I did wonder whether the Chancellor's announcement of changes to the fiscal rules would survive the weekend, given the 5 fictitious free ports that came and then went. It's a cautionary tale of the uncertainty and confusion that can be created when policy is not announced in the proper way in Parliament. I welcome the delayed statement by the Chief Secretary, and I'm grateful for the advanced sight of it. Madam Deputy Speaker, making a £50 billion announcement at a conference overseas and not at a fiscal event in this House has understandably and notably moved markets, adding further uncertainty to an already nervous business community. Although the Chancellor announced change last week, she didn't provide any details on what that change would be. This is a common approach by Labour. That is now coming back to bite them as the realities of government set in. The Prime Minister has admitted as much in recent days, speaking of the need to embrace fiscal reality by adopting measures which were never listed in Labour's manifesto. Never listed. In fact, the Chancellor explicitly said before the election that she would not change the fiscal rules because, in her words, this would be fiddling the figures. By going ahead with this latest U-turn and broken promise, the Chancellor's compromised trust and credibility ahead of her very first budget. This joins a long list of broken promises already by this Labour government in such a short period of time. The promise to cut energy bills by £300, broken. The promise that their manifesto was fully costed, broken. The promise to be on the side of pensioners, so obviously broken. And we know their promise not to raise taxes on working people is about to be broken too. Try as they might to sell a different story, just like government bonds right now, people ain't buying it. Because we are left in the ludicrous position where the UK, the 6th largest economy in the world, doesn't have an operative definition of public debt. Quite understandably, markets have responded to this latest uncertainty by applying a premium to the UK's sovereign debt at a time when it's been discounting the sovereign debt of our international peers. The markets are also perplexed as to why these changes were announced without an accompanying OBR report. In the words of the Chancellor herself, never have a government borrowed so much and explained so little. They may think that this will all go unnoticed, that most people don't know enough about what the fiscal rules actually are to know what's really going on here. But let me be very clear. The people will know about this. They will know it and feel it when interest rates stay higher for longer. Treasury advice to us was consistently clear that interest rates would stay higher if the rules were changed. So can he confirm what advice Treasury officials provided him of the impact on interest rates? And does he agree with Paul Johnson of the IFS, who said that this change will mean more debt interest, and that it's no free lunch? Of course, we all want to see investment in our public services and infrastructure. We oversaw the largest increase in funding for the NHS ever. We increased defence spending to the highest levels since the Cold War, and we attracted the second highest foreign direct investment in the world. But this investment was always with a view to boosting productivity by investing in technology now scrapped by Labour, and by spreading opportunity around this country through free ports and investment zones. This Labour government are quick to spend, but unwilling to explain. So can I ask the Chief Secretary finally, on behalf of the British people and the markets who are watching this statement so very nervously, what definition of public debt is the UK offering to lenders today, and how much does the government plan to borrow under an expanded definition? I know he'll say that we have to wait for the budget, but the Chancellor didn't wait last week, so why should we?
Exactly. Darren Jones.
I'm very fond of the Honourable Gentleman, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I have to say he has some brass neck standing up in this House telling this government how to behave after the years of his party's maladministration over the last 14 years. And might I just politely point out that he might be getting slightly ahead of himself. The Chancellor has not set out the detail of the fiscal rules in advance of the budget because she will do it to this House at the budget on Wednesday, and I encourage him to wait for that information. And could I just lastly suggest, in response to his question, that he painted a picture of the country performing so well under his party's leadership. He might want to reflect why he lost the last election so badly.
Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Dame Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, which of course has the responsibility of scrutinising the budget, it is a bit frustrating, the timing of this statement, where we are going to presumably get answers that we can't be answered until Wednesday. So perhaps the Chief Secretary could explain how the guardrails will work between the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, the Office of Value for Money and the National Audit Office, what roles each will play in making sure that we reassure the markets so that an autumn snuffle doesn't become a winter cold.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know the Chancellor looks forward to giving evidence to the Treasury Select Committee following the budget in the normal way. To answer the Right Honourable Lady's question, the National Infrastructure Strategy will bring together all of the infrastructure and major project asks of Whitehall departments into one place, alongside the economic infrastructure assessments for the first time. This will inform the multi-year spending reviews, which will now be overlapping, so we do not end up in a position once again where a government comes close to an election, makes no spending plans whatsoever, and announces a load of projects when there's no money to pay for them. And we think, and are very confident, that this better approach to allocating capital will mean that investment under this government is an investment that improves the productivity of our public services, the growth of our economy, and a better return for British taxpayers across the country.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Under the Conservatives, the fiscal rules changed 5 times in 7 years. So a change to fiscal rules in and of themselves is not that unusual. So, but would the Minister agree with me that what would be completely unforgivable would be a repeat of the Conservatives' disastrous mini-budget when they tried to pursue £40 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts, which left a long shadow on our public finances? And would he assure us that any additional borrowing that this government seeks to borrow will be for productive investment only, which will generate growth and will start the process of fixing our crumbling hospitals and schools?
Jones.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question and share her continued anger about the behaviour of the last Conservative government, because, as she and the whole House will know, our constituents are still paying the price of their chaos and their failure. Indeed, that's why the first act of this Labour government, the Budget Responsibility Act, the first act that I took through this House, locked in the powers of the Office for Budget Responsibility to hold this government and future governments to account. And if we were to ever end up in a position again where Conservative ministers decide to ignore the independent checks and balances, the Office for Budget Responsibility will be able to independently report its view to this House so that Parliament can hold future governments to account. I will just end by pointing to our first fiscal rule, which is that we will pay for day-to-day spending with receipts, which means, again, we will not end up in a situation like under the last government, where borrowing month after month after month was just paying for the bills that the last government didn't put the money aside to pay for.
Dr. Jeevun Sandher.
Madam Deputy Speaker, fiscal rules are a tool of responsibility. We should all welcome rules that help us to act responsibly and indeed to invest responsibly. Fiscal rules and the accounting definitions that underlie them are not matters of faith, preordained by the Almighty and passed to us on stone tablets. They are there to help us make responsible decisions. Would my right honourable friend agree with me, the former Chief Economist of the Bank of England, the OECD, the IMF, and George Osborne's former Treasury Minister, that we should welcome changes to the fiscal rules that promote investment?
Darren Jones.
I will avoid the suggestion that we might go back to putting things on stone tablets, if I might, but I will accept the invitation in the honourable member's question, which is that we've seen the failure of the approach from the last government after 14 years. I noted in my statement that public sector investment would have been at the lowest it had been for 10 years under plans from the now opposition. That has been a failure for the economy, a failure for the British people, and this government will rectify it.
Neil O'Brien.
Madam Deputy Speaker, before the election, the Chancellor said that she wouldn't change the measure of debt in order to borrow more, but now she's talking about doing exactly that. Before the election, she said she wouldn't increase national insurance. Now she's talking about doing exactly that. Before the election, they steered people away from the idea they'd cut the winter fuel payment. Now they've already done exactly that. They said before the election they wouldn't increase taxes on working people. Now they're planning to do exactly that. Does the Minister understand why so many of my constituents feel like they were misled?
Yes.
The honourable member's constituents will note at the budget on Wednesday that this party is a party that honours its promises. The promises set out in its manifesto to protect working people. And again, he may want to reflect about his own party failing his own constituents at the last election and reflect on that before trying to lecture this government.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome measures that allow for more long-term investment to improve our economic performance and our public services? Could I ask my right honourable friend just 2 aspects, if he could define them? In terms of those areas where more investment might be allowed, is housing one of them to help us achieve our target of 1.5 million homes in this Parliament? And secondly, will you ensure that wherever there is public investment, we try and make that investment produce orders for UK companies rather than many of the orders going abroad? That's the way should create real growth in our economy.
Darren Jones.
I thank him for his question. As he knows, we made a commitment to deliver 1.5 million homes, and we will do just that. In terms of the second part of his question, the whole purpose of the National Infrastructure Strategy and then the overlapping multi-year spending reviews is to give investors and suppliers the confidence that when the government says something will be delivered, that it will be delivered. They can invest and plan on that basis to help improve the British economy. And quite frankly, they're starting from a position of complete dismay because of the failed promises of the last government. We will rectify that.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If we could stick with the here and now, what the Chancellor announced caused the bond markets to move almost immediately by almost 0.5%. That means that interest rates will stay longer and higher for a longer time. That will cause, would he confirm, that will cause hardship to today's mortgage payers, and it will cause hardship to tomorrow's generation of taxpayers because they're going to have to repay this extra debt?
Darren Jones.
What I can confirm is that what affects interest rates and mortgage payments so severely was the chaotic behaviour of the Right Honourable Gentleman's party in government before the last election. That is why we've had to legislate to make sure that if they were ever to return to government, they wouldn't be able to behave in similar ways. That's why we are taking a responsible approach to public spending in the way that I've set out today, and we will never return to the activity of his former party in government.
Noah Law.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I might add that there appears to be some confusion on the benches opposite when talking about their track record and the records they have broken between the nominal and the real. So on the point of realism, will the Minister agree that if we are being realistic about our reform to the fiscal rules, unlike the last government, we must provide that realism and that stability and ensure that those wild unfunded commitments, such as that abolition of national insurance, don't occur.
Darren Jones.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He points quite rightly to the £22 billion black hole that we're having to clear up from the party opposite. And at the budget on Wednesday, the Chancellor will set out how we are resetting public finances and fixing the foundation so that we can get on and deliver our manifesto.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In outline terms, we welcome what the Government is seeking to do. It's important to raise the ability to generate capital infrastructure investment. Scotland invests 42% more than the UK average, and the UK is 50% lower than the OECD average. So this is a priority, but it will fall on stony ground if on Wednesday the Chancellor continues with her priority to not lift people out of poverty and going by exception after small businesses who take an income from that business and raising the cost of employment. With the 4 signal capital investment projects all being in England, I'm moved to ask, what's in this for Scotland?
Darren Jones.
Well, I'm delighted to hear the honourable gentleman tell the House that he welcomes the positive change this Labour government in Westminster is delivering to the Scottish people. I agree with him. And in terms of early announcements, I can point to GB Energy, the huge commitments we've made on energy infrastructure that we know will be important to the Scottish people. But I'd also say that we absolutely recognise that the Scottish economy has a huge contribution to play to the whole economy of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, and we look forward to working with the Scottish people to make that a reality.
Matt Trotter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I commend the Right Honourable Gentleman for his work on stability and investment. Would he like to say a little bit more about the challenging inheritance he's received from the last government and quite how dreadful that actually has been?
Darren Jones.
I welcome the honourable gentleman's question, and I know members on the opposite side find this uncomfortable, but it is a matter of fact that we will return to time and time again, because the sheer truth of it is that the last government promised the British people promise after promise after promise, knowing that they did not have the money to pay for the bills. It's shameful, and the sooner they come to this House and apologise for their behaviour, it might be better for them in the long run.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If the Minister is so confident in his fiscal rules, will he take this opportunity to commit to the House that the 10-year gilt yield in this Parliament will not exceed the maximum it was over the last 10 years.
Minister.
The honourable gentleman is trying to be clever, but is actually inviting me to speculate on the budget. He'll have to wait until Wednesday.
Joanna Baxter.
Deputy Speaker, does the Minister agree that sustainable growth cannot come from short-termism and that falls in public sector investment planned under the last government would have exacerbated rather than ameliorated the economic chaos that they got us into?
Minister.
My honourable friend is right. We have a choice at this budget to either continue with the failed policies of the last government or to change them. The British people will not be surprised that our decision is to change them, reflecting on the fact that the cut in investment under the last government has led to this poor productivity in public services and a lack of growth in the economy. That serves nobody.
Jim Allister.
This statement speaks of giving the private sector the confidence to invest. Could the Minister explain to the small businesses in my constituency how it would give them confidence if the first act of this government is to soak them with further national insurance increases? Isn't that going to dent confidence rather than increase it, along with sustained high interest rates? And when he speaks about multi-year spending reviews, does that mean that he now expects the devolved governments to produce multi-year budgets, something the Stormont government has been very reluctant to do?
I obviously can't speculate on the budget and invite the honourable gentleman to come back to the House on Wednesday for the answer to the first part of his question. In terms of the second part of his question, as he may know, I lead for the government in its relationship with the devolved governments. I've met in Belfast most recently with finance ministers from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and we had a productive meeting. They were all very clear that the reset in the relationship between them and the Westminster government was a positive reset given the failed relationships of the past. We made some progress in that meeting and we'll make further such progress in the budget.
John Trickett.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And isn't it clear that the ruling economic orthodoxy has let this country down over many years? How else can you explain the fact that in 24 of the last 30 years, the UK spent less on investment than any other G7 country? And in particular, those areas like mine, which are post-industrial, the investment simply didn't come. So can I encourage the Minister to break with the prevailing orthodoxy and ensure that we achieve investment levels of an appropriate amount, and particularly direct it into the North, the Midlands and elsewhere?
My honourable friend is inviting me to answer the question why there wasn't investment over the last decade or so. It's quite frankly because of the choices of the Conservative Party. This Labour Party in government is taking a different set of decisions, and we'll set out that detail on Wednesday.
Clive Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First, I would like to declare my interest as a Governor of the Royal Berkshire Hospital, and that I have a family member who is a shareholder in a health company. Madam Deputy Speaker, as Lord Darcy said, the Conservatives have failed to provide proper capital funding for our NHS. I would like to thank the Secretary of State, Minister of State, for their engagement with me and other MPs on the review of the new hospital programme. Can I ask the Chief Secretary to the Treasury if he will guarantee that these changes to fiscal rules now mean my constituents can see new and immediate funding for the Royal Berkshire Hospital?
Yeah. He asked me so politely, Madam Deputy Speaker, but he will know that I can't guarantee anything in advance of the budget. But what I will say to him is that he has already experienced, it sounds, the positive way in which this government is approaching how it will repair the NHS and get it back on its feet, both in terms of getting junior doctors off the strike line back into wards and investing in hospitals for the future. I know he'll look forward to the announcements in the budget on Wednesday.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Before I became an MP, I led services for very vulnerable people, and unfortunately came into close contact with gaslighting. As a new MP, I'm afraid my contact with gaslighting is not diminishing, and I'm slightly despairing of what I'm seeing in the opposition benches facing me. While out canvassing over the weekend, I was talking with residents on Ken Road in Southbourne, and I met a constituent who said the following to me: that we knew it wasn't going to be pretty, that you were going to inherit a mess. We knew that it would be a long haul to get things right, but we were sick and tired of politicians who wouldn't take the big decisions and invest in the long term. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we should listen to more of our constituents, like the constituent I was just mentioning, who happened to vote Labour for the first time in her life on July 4th?
I thank my honourable friend and thank his constituent for putting her trust into this Labour government. As the Prime Minister said today, this government will run towards the problems as opposed to running away from them, as the Conservative Party did. That will mean difficult decisions at the budget on Wednesday to deal with the mess that we've inherited, to reset public finances and to be able to start to deliver our manifesto. But those are the decisions this government will take, and we'll announce the detail on Wednesday.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his statement today? In relation to what the legacy will be, and I want to ask that question, will the Minister further outline how they changed the fiscal rules to allow for more efficient borrowing is not simply passing more debt on to be dealt with by my 6 lovely grandchildren, as an example, and all the other grandchildren as well, who are already facing a scaled-back welfare system and increased cost of living before they even earn their first paycheck? And how will the Minister's so-called guardrails not simply be barriers to owning own homes and making ends meet for future generations? It's for the ones who come after, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm thinking of them.
I thank the honourable member for his question. He and his constituents will know, as much as mine, that the problem that this country found itself in before the election was that the last government had to borrow money each month to pay for the bills it didn't have the money to pay for, and that it made a whole list of promises across the country that it knew it couldn't pay for. That's why we have this £22 billion black hole. That's why our first fiscal rule is that day-to-day spending will be paid for from tax receipts by the Exchequer. We will put the public budget back into surplus so that we're not in this doom loop of borrowing and borrowing and borrowing just to keep ahead of ourselves each month. Where the government does borrow, it will be borrowing for productive investment to modernise our public services and to get growth back into our economy.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. New research published this month by the IFS shows that reversing the two-child benefit cap would lift 540,000 children above the absolute poverty line. There are no fiscal rules, only fiscal choices. While task forces meet, more and more children in Coventry South and across the country are consigned to avoidable poverty. When will the government acknowledge this, prioritise it, ending child poverty and finally scrap the pernicious two-child benefit cap?
I thank my honourable friend for her question and share her commitment to wanting to tackle child poverty in this country, a proud record that this party had from being in government previously. That's why we've set up the Child Poverty Task Force, which has reported last week our ambition to reduce child poverty over the course of this Parliament, and we'll set out further measures in the budget on Wednesday on how we intend to deliver that.
Dr Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement. Residents and businesses in my constituency absolutely share our ambition to get the country back on track, and they acknowledge that the mission-led focus of the government and the fiscal rules are absolutely at the core of that. And they contrast that with 14 years of drift under the party opposite, punctuated only with 49 days of utter chaos. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, residents and businesses in my ward do want to be reassured that they can be confident in the level of ambition we have. So can the Minister update us on how investors are responding to our focus and the maturity we are bringing to the debate around the economy?
My honourable friend and point him to our very successful International Investment Summit only a couple of weeks ago, where it was very clear from investors that bringing stability back to our politics and our economy has been long wanted. That's why we were able to commit £63 billion of investment into the country at that summit, followed by another £10 billion of investment announced only a few days after. We intend to raise much more to invest in this country and to bring growth back to the economy.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Constituents in Milton Keynes voted for change because they are seeing the consequences of the Conservative economic policy. They are suffering from the cost of living crisis, and they've seen this in their crumbling schools and the lack of GP appointments and the use of the food bank just to make ends meet. Can the Chief Secretary reassure myself and my constituents that we will end the Conservative use of payday loans just to keep the lights on, and in fact instead invest in new schools, new hospitals, new infrastructure, and alongside our making work pay, so that my constituents see their lives improve?
I thank my honourable friend for her question, and with her reference to payday loans points to the behaviour of the last government. As I've told the House already this afternoon, this government, with its first fiscal rule, will take us to a place where we are not borrowing to pay the bills each month, as it happened for months and years under the Conservative Party. Anyone managing a family finances at home knows that's the right thing to do, and they will welcome the fact that their government is bringing that sense of discipline back to the national economy too.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will my right honourable friend confirm that as part of its fiscal strategy and within the fiscal rules, the government will utilise the National Wealth Fund to lever in private investment along with public investment from the taxpayer to invest in key areas of growth for our economy, for example in renewables infrastructure, which is of course of such importance in Scotland?
I thank my honourable friend. He knows that the test of a good government is if you can secure private sector investment to come alongside you, something that had declined under the last government. That's why the National Wealth Fund, which the Chancellor has already announced, will secure billions of pounds of private sector investment alongside public sector investment in the industries of the future.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister agree that the previous government's failure to invest not only has damaged economic growth, but also led to damage to our public services, broken NHS, special educational needs in crisis, local government on the brink?
I thank my honourable friend, and he will know from his campaign to be elected and since speaking to his constituents that people's experience of public services across the country shows the facts of the matter. After 14 years of failure from the Conservatives, our public services are on their knees, which is why they need a government that's going to bring stability back to our economy, invest in public services and improve outcomes for people that rely on them and those who work in them.
Luke Charters.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following the disastrous mini-budget, the Bank of England was forced to undertake emergency liquidity operations to reduce volatility in markets. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the investment summit record $63 billion shows that it is this government that's creating stable conditions for long-term investment after years of political chaos from the party opposite?
I thank my honourable friend for his excellent question and agree with him that that was a sign of confidence, £63 billion being invested in this country, because investors around the world know that Britain is back after years of chaos.
Torsten Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's good to hear change the big problem with our macroeconomic framework, the bias against new investment spending. But can I draw the Chief Secretary's attention to the other problem with the system, which is that it gives an incentive to ministers not to well manage the assets they already hold. And I draw his attention to the 2017 sale of £3.5 billion worth of student loans for just £1.7 billion. So when it comes to financial assets, will he reassure the House that changes he is making will ensure we get value for money for the existing financial assets we hold?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I can give him those reassurances and also point to the Office for Value for Money, which will be doing work for us to ensure that we can improve on behaviours of the past, but also to point more broadly to the way in which we do manage our current assets. And people only have to look at the state of our prisons, our hospitals, our schools, with rack and roofs falling in to know that after 14 years of cuts to investment, we can't carry on like that. That's why people voted for change at the last election and why we will deliver it.
Just have a moment for the front benches to swap over again.